and American gypsies, whose ancestral roots are in India.
Okay, we made it through the article without anybody dying. Okay, so just general reactions from people. Just a couple reactions about the article.
He needs Freudian analysis himself.
Yeah, Rohan.
Well, one, Freudian analysis, while it does have a place, my mom's a psychiatrist, so I remember asking her a lot about this. Freudian analysis in terms of like psychology or psychiatry, while it was like an initial great starting point, it's very similar to like Aristotle's theories, like that they were there, they started the process towards us coming to the beliefs that we have today, but it's not really a relied upon system or an accepted system, and this kind of glorifies and overemphasizes the impact or the credibility that Freudian analysis has, which is little to none in the modern psychological sense.
Sure. Very true. Yeah.
It also reminds me of when I think it was Thomas Jefferson, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but he was writing in his journal about why African Americans were inferior and like write all these observations about how like their head was too small. And just reminded me exactly of that, because it's like this person is treating their subject as like some sort of thing that's like subhuman and gross. And I don't know.
Yeah, Shoni.
Clearly this article does not have a competent editor because 3 paragraphs are repeated.
Really?
Unless
That might have been me. I was like coughing. That might have been me.
Wow.
Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm the incompetent editor. But I would argue that this editor is incompetent because Brahmin is spelled wrong.
Right. Yeah, that's true. But the other thing that's interesting is that it's considered a news release, and when you go to journalism school, like you were taught that this is not a news release. News articles have a very set, specific structure. Where they have, it's like a pyramidal form. You have to have the entire, all the news in that first paragraph, and then you just kind of keep repeating. Whereas this is really more like a magazine article or something.
Okay, so let's continue to discuss this article in the context of the second page, which is the analysis. So what is the central claim that's made in the piece? So let's be objective and just say what Dundee's, go ahead.
It sounds like the author of this article is implying that there's no or little, if any, like rich cultural basis to the Hindu religion or the caste system, that there's no like intellectual basis. It's just all like, primitive, Freudian, has to do with the way we use the toilet.
Right. So it has, Right, so they're saying the caste system has to do with cleanliness and pollution and how you defecate.
And I might add, it's written all over the scripture, right? All over the books, it's clear.
Do you want to say something, Harsh? Okay, no, I thought you said, okay. Yeah, so that's basically the claim, right, that the caste system is based on a pollution complex. Okay, so what are the 2 primary arguments by which the professor in this article supports these claims? 2 major things,
Crow and the Sparrow story and the kids.
Yeah, so the Crow and the Sparrow story.
Which is a folklore.
Which is a folktale. And the toilet training techniques, which is that parents allow their children to defecate in the open when at an early age. A more lenient approach is used. Blah blah blah. The parents will clean it up, and then at age 5, the child's training ends with a traumatic crackdown, which he is expected to respond with absolute obedience and conformity to familial and social standards. So there's like this.
Social and familial standards, we don't even know.
It's never mentioned, right?
Yeah.
So it's, in my opinion, very vague. But those are the 2 arguments he makes, right? The Crow and the Sparrow story. So is everybody familiar with the Crow and the Sparrow story? You want us to explain? Anybody else who wants to explain?
It's in the Amartya Sarkar book.
So what do you guys think? So who's not familiar with it? Raise your hand.
A lot of people.
So a lot of people are not familiar with it. So we're the people who are supposed to be conforming to the caste system, right? And be conditioned by these stories. We're not familiar with the Crow and the Sparrow story. So it's not a very good argument to say that the Crow and the Sparrow story is what's causing this problem, right? If we've never heard the story. Second problem is for people who have heard the story, it doesn't have, the moral of the story is not actually based on casteism. I'm not familiar with the full story, so I won't say. So maybe if you could share.
It's I mean, it's kind of discussed here. It's about like a crow and a sparrow, and crow's supposed to be like dirty or something like that, and it wants to be, I guess, like similar to a sparrow. So it tries to constantly like be associated with the sparrow, but it's like, oh, but it can never be a sparrow because it's a crow and it's dirty. That's, I guess, one interpretation of it.
Right. Another interpretation could be that you should always follow your own dharma, your own swadharma, right? And this crow is trying to be something that he's not, and therefore he ends up dying for it, right? Yeah.
Then there's also another part where it says in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth paragraph. In the book, he uses two Indian folktales. One about a crow who unsuccessfully tries to eat communally. Communalism. And now spreading that over to people.
Right. So the language that's used also, yeah. Okay, so let's. So those are the two arguments. Let's evaluate the arguments. So are counter arguments analyzed? So are alternative mechanisms by which this could be caused? So let's assume that his thesis is correct, which it's not, but let's assume it is. Are counter arguments as to why his thesis could be correct analyzed in this piece? No? So you never get any type of argument against an alternative, right? So when you present any type of research and you present any type of model, you not only have to argue why your model fits the conclusion that you make, but you also have to argue why it's better than alternative models, right? So the author never does this. That's arguably this is a press release, so I would say that that shouldn't be done. But I would also venture that he doesn't do it in his book. Are the arguments made convincing and watertight? Yeah, Neil.
So I think there's a lot of ways to be criticized the methodology. One thing, like the whole Freudian analysis angle. By the way, I just checked as we were reading. Even if you accept Freudian analysis as like a valid methodology, which again many psychiatrists don't, he himself, the article, especially at the beginning, repeatedly says, "Oh, he's a professor, and he has this. He's in a book. He's this intelligent guy, which I'm sure he is intelligent." It says all these things to bolster his credentials, but doesn't mention his training. That his PhD is in literature, in folklore, and so I'm not sure
he has a qualification.
Even if Freudian analysis was a valid methodology, it doesn't seem that he has the qualification to use the methodology. But that's just attacking the person. That's not attacking the argument.
Sure.
I think my biggest problem with the methodology is. I'll assume that in some way for his research for the book, he interviewed people to ask how do you train how do you train your kids or something. What I'm guessing he didn't do is ask those people what they thought of that. Right? It's essentially what seems to have happened here is a white American male scholar. I'm using quotes for people on the video. Went to a completely different country, a culture he had no background in. And by the way, again, from looking at his background, he's not a Indian studies focused guy, right? He doesn't have any academic background in India in an extensive way, right? So he went to a country he's not familiar with people. It sounds like he probably went to some rural community, right, or some less privileged community. And interviewed them about this potty training techniques. And he interviewed all these people and now went back to the US and wrote this book telling everybody else, here's what those people think, here's what those people believe, here is what these potty training things mean to these people. He just went and collected the observations he wanted to have and then turned that into a story telling others, including telling Indians, here's what you believe. That is, I think that is a gross abuse of the privileged position he's in. I think it's also academically disingenuous to make these kind of strong claims about the way someone thinks. Right? He's essentially saying the link is in that person's mind. This child who went through this traumatic, apparently potty training technique, right? Here's the impact that had on the person. Anyone who has any background in psychology, therapy, the most basic rule of understanding trauma. I mean, he calls it the trauma. I don't know if he uses it.
Traumatic crackdown. He says that. Yeah.
Yeah. So he uses the word trauma. The most important rule of understanding someone's trauma is to listen to that person, right? You think of survivors of like actual trauma, like whether it's rape, whether it's massacres, whether it's like all the kind of horrible things that happen to people, right? The way you understand we were talking about earlier, right? Individualized experiences, right? Humanizing people. You have to listen to these people without bias and like get their perspective on what their trauma means to them. And it doesn't sound like he's done that. Like, did these people who were interviewed for the article know what claims he made based off the interviews he had with them? I doubt it.
No.
But also, there's no evidence that he actually went to India.
That's true. It doesn't say that he ever did. And I'm sure.
Benefit of the doubt that he even did that.
But I would say that if it was mentioned, that if he actually did it, the press release would probably mention it. Like if he was in India for like 2 years, it would almost always mention that, like, you know? Okay, we have to move on to the last question because we have more stuff to get to. So all our double standards at play, and specifically what are the double standards? Yeah, go ahead.
So I think it's like
Deba, wake up.
the fourth para, you can just like you can just like reject the whole press release because he says like, but I think I offered. He thinks he offered. Like I can think I am the president of the United States. I am the president of the United States. Is a different.
You can't summarily dismiss it. So the whole point of this session is that we look at very specifically what's wrong with the things, right? So sometimes we see something at the beginning, we're like, I'm not going to read it. You can't do that. You have to go through the whole thing and just deconstruct it.
He says he thinks. So he's basing everything that he studied.
Yeah.
Like he wrote the book on.
Yeah.
About like on an assumption.
No, but I mean, anybody would say that, you know, if you wrote a book, you would say that I think this is good, right? Anybody would say that.
What is happening?
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, let's hear from Shriman because he hasn't talked yet.
So you had a point. That's what I was going to say.
Oh, Rohan, you weren't. Go ahead, Rohan.
I have a point to make.
No.
Go ahead, Rohan.
Okay. Basically, yeah, like when he says that I offer a plausible, coherent explanation
Yeah.
for the pattern, that I think he's just saying that I've examined the pattern.
Right.
This seems to be the cause to me. Like
Right.
that part doesn't seem
Right.
to be problematic. That seems like a trick.
Right.
We could probably move on.
Right, right. Yeah, and Neil.
Very good example. Again, I've just been like reading about this guy. He's an interesting guy. This is not the only time he's applied psychoanalysis in controversial ways.
Oh,
He apparently
interesting.
published a very another very controversial study that sought to demonstrate the anal erotic fixation in German national character, which caused a lot of Germans to be very upset. It seems. Which that is what it is. His his studies and his beliefs, like his studies are what they are. If you look at the coverage of the news describing that paper
versus
right,
this, yeah.
There they say, oh, this guy released a study, here's what it says, it's very controversial, Germans are upset, here's what a German guy says about it, right? It's describing, hey, a paper was released, true, here's the claim that this paper makes, fine, right? And here's the reaction to it. That's kind of like how the release is framed. Whereas this is just saying, this isn't. This is just saying the first part of that, right?
Right.
So I think you can see the disbalance in the coverage. It's like totally independent of the accuracy of the claims, just the way those claims are covered. I think there's a discrepancy.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so hopefully you guys have the framework that you can use to analyze similar academic pieces that you might read about Hinduism when you go back to your universities and you sort of look at what your curriculum is like and what articles your professors are giving you to read. So the last thing I wanted to discuss is photos and visual stimulus that are used in these stories. So the methodology I'm going to advocate is to ask whether the photo is more prejudicial than probative. And this is a phrase that comes to us from the legal profession. So prejudicial means that the material is meant to prejudice the viewer unfairly against the subject by inflaming passions, making unfair associations, etc. So this would be like if you were on a murder trial, right, and you depicted the defendant, you had a photo of him with blood spatter on his face. That was photoshopped or something like that, right? So you just pick a photo that's photoshopped and you put blood spatter on the face. It's meant to tell the jury this person is guilty. There's blood spatter on his face, right? Yeah.
Just to clarify, it doesn't have to be Photoshopped.
It could be real.
It could be like he happened to have blood for whatever reason, right?
Yes. Like if he was a butcher, for example, and he was at the shop and he just, he'd have blood on his face, right? Probative. The material is evidentiary. It supports a verbal argument with visual corroboration. So probative comes from the word probe, right? So it allows us to probe deeper into what the story is saying and provides evidence that clarifies what the author is saying. Remember that pictures are worth 1,000 words. So for an author or for a a newspaper, using photos is very important because it conveys a message very, very succinctly when you have word limits and space limits in what you can say and can't say. So similarly to how this standard is used in trials, whether the evidence is probative in the sense that it's allowing the jury to see a perspective or see the evidence in a new light, or if it's prejudicial in the sense that it's only meant to inflame or primarily meant to inflame the passions of the jury and bias them against the defendant or the plaintiff. We should similarly ask whether photographs that are used in newspaper journalism and also visual journalism are in fact more prejudicial than probative, and are they meant to unfairly bias us just by the photo itself. So let's look at some examples to see what I mean. So here's one example. This is from the BBC. So the caption, if you can't read it, is Sharad Sharma is a functionary of a radical Hindu group. So let's take that as a given, that he's a functionary of a radical Hindu group. Let's not question that. Functionary is somebody who works for. Okay? So let's just assume that in fact Sharad Sharma self-identifies as a radical Hindu group, from a radical Hindu group. Let's just take that as a given. I don't agree, maybe, but let's just take that as a given. We don't know. Now, what is still problematic about this image together with the caption? What do you guys think? Yeah, Neil.
The image is there's nothing in the image that's specific to radical groups, right? This could be any Hindu man anywhere in the world, right? The scene is very calm, it's actually quite serene with like the light in the background and stuff, like it's Rama and Hanuman, like very popular Hindu deities, right? There's nothing here specific to radical Hindu groups, which the effect is to equip somebody who sees that and thinks that is what radical Hinduism looks like. Right. Well, then if that person then goes to any other Hindu temple, right,
and sees Rama and Hanuman,
they'll see the same scene and think all of Hinduism is radical.
Right.
It's associating to standard mainstream Hinduism with radical Hinduism. And just to give the example of that, if this were another group, right? If the caption was about a radical the Muslim group like ISIS or Al Qaeda, right? And they had a picture of a man in like a standard salwar just standing outside, like a beautiful mosque, right? And like that was the picture for a caption of ISIS. People would think that like anyone, and there's like beautiful mosque. There's a beautiful mosque in New York that has tons of people coming every weekend, especially, right? If somebody sees that scene and that's the only picture they've seen, they'll think that everyone in that mosque is radical.
Exactly.
Which is absolutely not true.
Yeah, exactly. I think you covered all the points for this photo. Since we only have a short amount of time left, I'm just going to keep going. Sorry. So I'm going to skip this one. So this is about Sabrimala. So I'm just going to say, so this is a story about the rise of hardline Hinduism in Modi's India. So let's take the headline as given and assume that this thesis statement is properly analyzed and they make the best argument possible and they back it up with facts appropriately. Let's just make that assumption. The photo that's used is of Sabrimala. So what is relevant about Sabrimala in the context of hardline Hinduism? Are these devotees who are going to Sabrimala hardline Hindus? Right? Okay, last one. This is the one I was talking about, which I think this is the worst headline and also the worst photo, perhaps. Headline: more than electronic voting machines, that's EVM, more than electronic voting machines, it is the Hindu mind which has been effectively rigged. This is in the context of the Indian election. So the people who voted for Modi, their minds have been rigged. That's what the author is saying. Modi has become, you can't probably read the caption, it says, Modi has become confident that the Hindu mind has been vulgarized and become so spiritually hollow. So the 45% of people who voted for Modi are spiritually hollow, that even a crudity like his Kedarnath Yatra, going to Kedarnath in the way that Modi did is crude, can pass off as a religious expedition. So not a true religious expedition, it's a crude political gimmick. And the caption under the photo is actually is from West Bengal. It says, a bike rally during the Ram Navami procession in Kolkata in 2018. So that's the photo that's used in the context of this.
How does it relate? It's not even BJP election flag.
It doesn't say that these people are from the BJP anywhere.
Right.
They could just be people who are carrying out a Ram Navami procession.
There is no correlation between the election.
We don't know. Yeah, surely.
I just have a quick question. Like, what is this from? And
This is from it's something called The Wire.
oh,
Oh,
I see. And
Huh?
when was this published?
This was published maybe 2 days ago. Okay, so what else is wrong with this photo? So yeah, they're associating regular Hindu people with Hindu mind rigging and Modi. Yeah.
I think the imagery, because it's a picture of like bikes and like red scarves and like a bunch of saffron. It looks red. Sorry, not that. Saffron scarves and that's important too because that's traditional Hindu color.
Yeah.
And just like it being all men and none of them look like happy or like they're celebrating. They all look kind of like suspicious or like at least serious.
Yeah, notice, so this guy, he looks kind of happy, but he's all the way in the back, so you can't tell. Here, go ahead.
You know, this kind of picture is like really dangerous and can give a really bad impression. You know why? So I live in Newark, right? And like we like see gang members on motorcycles all the day. When I see that, I think of like they're like a bunch of gangsters coming at you. That's the impression I get.
Very close up, right?
Yeah.
The guy in the photo, it looks like he's right there in front of you. The perspective that's taken is also
So it
important.
looks like a KKK rally, the Hindu version of the KKK rally. Flags and motorbikes and stuff.
Yeah.
If you go down south, you'll find KKK rallies.
But I think, sorry, Neil. But I think the main thing here is that there's no women in this picture at all. It's all men, and it's all men that look very serious, and they're very in your face, which is, meant to give a specific impression, right? Okay, so Professor Jewelry's analysis of this type of thing is that Hindus are rendered into masses, like in this photo, right? There's a lot of people together. You can't like say any one person is like the subject of this photograph. And Muslims are presented as individuals. Again, this is relating to like how people are presented as either being individuals and having like a human face and an individual story versus somebody who's just part of a group and part of like groupthink, right? This is about how people have been brainwashed or their minds have been rigged. So presenting a mass of people rather than presenting a single person is very important, because when we think of like people being brainwashed or people have their minds being rigged, that means that, right, they're sort of in groupthink mode and they're all just going along with it. So having a mass of people is very important for that imagery, as opposed to having a singular person who has a story behind why they're at this Ram Navami Yatra, right? Maybe they're just trying to celebrate like Ram in this festival. We don't know. Another extreme example that sometimes happens. So this is from Huffington Post, and I must say that I used to write for the Huffington Post, so this is embarrassing. But this says that outstation students at NIT Srinagar allegedly threatened with rape. And the photo is from a Bajrang Dal protest, which has nothing to do with the rape. Literally, this has nothing to do with this story at all. It's just trying to create an association. Okay, so this is from SpongeBob. So this is what we often confront when we try to explain Hindu phobia to other people. So in the first slide, this person says, these claims are being made without factual basis. And Patrick, who's being explained to, so this is from a scene from SpongeBob between Patrick Star, who's SpongeBob's best friend, and Man Ray, who's an evil supervillain. Okay? So Man Ray is talking to Patrick, and he's trying to convince him that the wallet that's on the ground is his. So the first thing he says is that he finds his driver's license in the thing. Okay? So he says, these claims are being made without factual basis. So if you look at a news story, you say, these claims that are being made without factual basis. And the person you're talking to says, yes, I agree. Then you say, these claims about Hinduism are made in an article that doesn't include a Hindu voice. And the person also says, yeah, I agree, Then you say, if we reduced any other religion to these violent tropes, it would be labeled as bigotry. And Patrick says, makes sense to me, right? Then you say, then Mandre says, so except there is Hinduphobia, right? You said their claims were made without a factual basis. The article in which these claims were made doesn't include a Hindu voice to speak for themselves. If this was done to any other group, it would be considered bigotry. And you agreed with that, so therefore except there's Hinduphobia. And at the end the person says, what are you talking about? And their whole mind reverts back to the idea that Hindus are like the colonizers of India, that they're the ones who colonized India. There were Aryans that came in, they pushed out the Dravidians, the Adivasi people, who are the real indigenous people of India, that Hindu people don't really have a history of being oppressed at all. That's sort of the thing that, if you were to talk to somebody like online, and I've seen a bunch of examples of people trying to do this, when all these stories are coming out, they're trying to explain to other people like what is going on. This is sort of the reaction that you'll get, is that, no, you're the real oppressors. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have an idea of when each of the terms were coined, like Hinduphobia versus Islamophobia versus anti-Semitism? Like how old are each of those words?
So if you look at this statement at the bottom, so when I typed Hinduphobia into PowerPoint, I noticed that there's a squiggly that comes up under it, which means that Microsoft Word and Microsoft Office doesn't recognize Hinduphobia as a word.
Right, I'm just asking.
But if you type in Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, it will recognize them.
So I'm asking how old are each of those words? Like,
so Islamophobia, I have no idea. I honestly have no idea.
It was coined by the Council of American Islamic Relations, CARE, around the wake of September 11th.
So probably like 17, 18 years old.
Yeah.
And then anti-Semitism obviously
is much older.
And then Hinduphobia, how old is that?
Probably.
When the academic Hinduphobia book got released by Rajiv Ji.
So like probably when Invading the Sacred happened, which was like 12 years ago.
12. Yes. So then, okay.
It's like, yeah.
So that's what I was trying to get at.
It's been enough time, but Hinduphobia doesn't get as much attention in mainstream media coverage, right? Okay. Anything else?
Islamophobia we talked about was just 18 years old from 2011 roughly, right?
Well, so the word is, the phenomenon isn't, but the word is.
No doubt. But what I'm saying is the word, it's in 18 years has picked up such like massive global appeal, right?
Right.
And a lot of other things that are non-Islamic are also put in there.
Right.
Versus Hinduphobia, we talked about also in 2011. It's been 9 years, right? Roughly, let's say. In 9 years, there's like very, very small acceptance.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say half of Islamophobia. Right?
Yeah.
So the dichotomy is huge.
Yeah.
I will say in one way that might be a good thing. In some way, like if you talk to like some of my friends, every time a news article comes out, they just say, "Oh, please, 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 let it not be a Muslim person this time." So it's like in that sense, I think in some ways we should be great.
But that's about the realities of the way that Muslim people are being targeted in this country right now, and not related to how they're being treated in the media, right? Because
this is saying it's probably a good thing that Hindus are not getting.
Is it like fatigue? Like people are tired of reading about it?
No, they're just saying like
They don't want to be targeted. That's
I guess.
Yeah, but that's about the reality of people being targeted versus like explaining to someone like about, because this is not about Hindus being targeted. I mean, certain violence has happened against them, but this is about like how they're treated in the media.
No, and I totally get those issues, and this is probably a much longer conversation, so I'm gonna stop right there.
Yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
I also think there's like a difference in like religion and culture of like Islam in the US and Islam in India.
Yeah, of course.
Like definitely.
Yeah.
I think that like you can't, I think that those are two separate entities.
Yeah.
Like you can't just group
Yes,
them together.
that's very true. Yeah, that's very true. Very true. Okay, so I had other stuff that I wanted to do, but it doesn't seem like we have any time left. So I will say that that's it. Hopefully this presentation was helpful in getting you guys to think about how you can deconstruct some of the things that you see in the media as it relates to Hinduism, and getting you guys to question. Like Shirley was saying, that she almost accepted like what was happening and like what she was reading. So always just like think about like what are the counter arguments against it, and you can always do your own research to see like, so for example, just give one quick example. Oh, here it is. So in this Guardian piece, there's somebody quoted as saying, on the campaign trail, Muslims were denigrated as termites by Modi's right-hand man. But if you click on this link, the usage of the word termites is actually not used with respect to Muslims. It's used with respect to immigrants. So that's really problematic. Using the word termites for immigrants is, I would argue, still really problematic. But the point is that this piece is passing it off as something else entirely, right? So they're trying to recast something using some other interpretation of it. So that's also important that we just do our due diligence about a piece and actually look at what they're saying with the evidence. Yeah.
So we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the leadership training session that we're going to do, but just like think about Clark's presentation and how you're going to apply and what you're going to do now as a result of these. Like when you see an article, how are you going to respond? Or if someone says something like this to you, how are you going to respond? So this is a really good presentation, and now I want you to think about how you can apply it.
Yeah, and also I would say for the tactics in terms of getting Patrick Starr to understand that it's his wallet. I think if you present double standard is I think the easiest way, because I think people do have implicit biases like we all do. And if you tell somebody think about it from your perspective, actually put yourself in my shoes, that's the most effective way of doing it. And if you just keep doing it, that person might get some ounce of understanding after a long time. It's very hard to break through, but you just have to keep doing it and trying it and keep using language that is not inflammatory and not extreme, and is very rational and based in a foundation of that what he's trying to do here, right?
Before you go,